right. Welcome back, everyone. It's good to see you. I was able to pop into 3 sessions out of the 5. It was really hard to leave good conversations. And I saw a lot of good energy, great conversation among folks, and filled rooms, packed rooms. Again, I am Annie Izod. I am the Executive Director of the NCWorks Commission and co-chair of this Talent First Economics Task Force, along with Philip Cooper. So we have several task force members here today, one that represents each of the 5 working groups. And I'm going to do some quick introductions, although you can find their bios on the Forum app if you've downloaded that. And so the first is Philip Cooper. We all know him. But in addition to being the task force co-chair and IEI practitioner in residence, Philip Cooper is a workforce equity advocate with the Land of Sky Regional Council in Western North Carolina and served on the Justice Involved Work Group. Next, we have Beth Butler Fadel. She's the Executive Director of DisabilityIN North Carolina, a statewide organization located in Huntersville, near Charlotte, and served on the Disability Neurodiversity Work Group. Next, we have Marion McClary, and the third person here is the third director of the Veterans Employment with NC4Me, a statewide organization located in Eastern North Carolina, and served on the Transitioning Military and Their Families Work Group. Our fourth panelist is Katherine Goldstein. She's a journalist, a corporate speaker, and consultant on caregiver issues located in the Triangle. She served on the Families with Young Children Work Group. And last but not least, we have Randolph Keaton. He's the Executive Director of the Men and Women United for Youth and Families in CDC in Eastern North Carolina. He served on the Opportunity Youth Work Group. Thank you all for being here today, and thank you for all the work that you've done on the task forces and your efforts across the state. So we're going to get started, and we're going to make this a conversation today. I'm going to have some questions for our panelists. And so our first one, I'm going to start with you, Philip. So you represent the Justice Involved Working Group. Can you tell us about a challenge that was discussed in the task force and maybe just now in the breakout session that may impact at least one other group? So not just your group, but may hit the other groups.
Well, I know you asked for one, but I'm going to have to say 2. Jennifer so eloquently let us know the importance of using the appropriate language. People first. We have to see the folks we're working with as people first. And that's no matter what work group we're talking about. But the other one I would say is, that investment that's needed in the workforce behind the workforce. Because we have a lot of amazing resources that exist here in North Carolina, but there are still some people that are falling in the gaps. And so we've seen that, we heard lingo like certified peer support specialists, lingo like community health workers, and these are evidence-based practices that could contribute to closing that gap and getting more education to the community about the amazing resources that are underutilized by certain populations.
Thank you. Next, Beth, I have a question for you. So as you all know, you represent the Disability and Neurodiversity Working Group. And this is made up of people with many different identities and challenges, who's often overlooked, and we need to start thinking about. So let's think about, the question for you is, are there any other facets of the community that we think that we're not seeing, beyond in the group of disability and neurodiverse?
Yeah, well, it's a really great question, and I think the fact that we are in the room today in this forum is a testament to the fact that we are at the intersection, right, of all of these other areas. And I talked about this in our last session, whether it's justice involved, whether it's homelessness, whether it's poverty. People with disabilities cross all of those other segments, right? And so I think this is the time for us to get off the sideline and be invited into the room to have a bigger conversation. And let's not be afraid of the disability conversation. We say this to employers all the time. If you wait to get your living room all in order, right, before you invite people in, you're never going to do this. There's a fear associated with this work. And so I think the important thing is to remember that we all belong here, right? We all have a contribution to make. And so for people with disabilities in this state and across the country, it's as diverse as any other population, right? It doesn't discriminate. And so I think if we lead with disability and we start talking about what we need to do to accommodate and make opportunities for employment open, our education system, start those conversations around accommodations and access so that we don't have the statistics that were demonstrated and shared this morning. The justice involved, right? If those students are identified in school, in their communities at a young age, and they start getting the supports and directions that they need, we can change the trajectory, right, of their careers and of where they're headed. So thank you for having us here.
Thank you. Thank you for being here. And thank you for helping us to understand that we're talking about cross-cutting issues. We're talking about folks that may have a disability, but may also, be bilingual or live in a rural area or be bicultural, right? So they have other sort of types of barriers that may make it difficult for employment. Okay, so we're going to switch to Katherine. Tell us about your lived experience as someone who is a caregiver and someone with young children. What gives you a sense of urgency about the workforce issues that families face in North Carolina?
Thanks so much for that question. So in addition to focusing on caregiver issues and issues facing especially mothers in the workplace, I'm also the mother to a 7.5-year-old and twins who just turned 3 yesterday. So I very much live the child care crisis that and the challenges that so many different families face. So sometimes it feels to me like the world is divided between people whose family finances and lives completely revolve around how expensive and difficult it is to get childcare, and every family personally solving for these massive public policy failures, and then the people who have no idea this is going on. So I'm hoping today to use my few moments to just share a little bit for that group that may not realize how dire of a situation this is for young people, for families with young children, specifically in North Carolina. So, as Philip mentioned, the entire state of North Carolina is a child care desert, the entire state. For every 100 children born, there are less than 20 licensed daycare spots for those 100 children. In some areas of the state, wait lists for infant daycare average around 1 year. So you think about when you need to get on that wait list and when people need to go back to work in a state and a country without paid family leave. And I'm here to tell you that in many communities in the state, including where I live in Durham, getting childcare, getting aftercare, getting summer camp, a safe and enriching place for your kids to be so you can work, is basically like the Hunger Games. This is I'm not joking. I'm there at the computer at 9 a.m. to get my kid in a summer camp so I can work. All these issues, these were issues before the pandemic, but nationally, 88,000 childcare workers have left the industry since COVID. So for all of you economics nerds, I feel like there might be a few economics nerds in this audience at IEI. This is a classic case of market failure. It's too expensive for families, there's not enough inventory, and the pay for workers is too low. So this has a huge impact on our workforce availability. And a recent study that just came out a week and a half ago says these childcare issues are costing our state $3.5 billion every year. $3.5 billion, if you want to talk about the workforce behind the workforce. So our working group really focused on the idea of wanting some culture change and really reframe the idea that North Carolina can be a state that's good for jobs and good for families. This is something that can go hand in hand. They are not opposed. They're very much part of the same mission. And I think that this really needs to be a top priority for our state, involving public-private partnerships. In my opinion, this is what public policy is for. This is why we have government, to help us solve some of these problems, because I don't believe the free market can solve this. So working together with state and local governments, faith-based and nonprofit organizations, and local businesses are all a huge part of how we make North Carolina a good for jobs, a good for family state.
Thank you. And thank you, Katherine. You summarized the issues that are broad and complicated very well for everyone. And now I'm going to focus on Marion. And I just wanted to see if you can share with us, why was it about this forum, having folks with lived experience involved in these discussions? Why do you think it's important to informing our solutions?
That's a great question. Thank you for that. So having the lived experience, or that shared experience, am I really loud? I feel like I'm really loud. But having that, it's important. As a Marine veteran, coming in and talking about transitioning service members and those families and some of the obstacles and barriers that they face, I think my perspective in that is unique in that I'm a veteran. So I think it applies across all the different workforces that we talked about, like lived experience. And I love when you said that when we first met, like having that lived experience, shared experience is vital. It kind of makes you a subject matter expert to what you did, right? So I think that's very important, and I really believe the perspectives, like for me, like I said, being a veteran, I can understand it. I can speak the language. I can tell you how terrifying it was after 21 years in the Marine Corps to say, hey, I'm going to retire. Now, what do I do with my hands, So it was difficult, but now we're here, so it's good.
Yeah. And I think, too, the helpful is you'll be able to help inform some decisions that maybe people don't realize what it was like to go through that. And we need to know that, right, to come up with the support services that are necessary to get folks where they need to be. So I think I want to, before we go into a couple more questions, I do have one for Randolph coming up. But I want to kind of make sure that we go over what these cross-cutting themes are. And I know I mentioned it earlier, but I think as you hear these folks talk and you went to the breakout sessions, you can kind of understand that there are some cross-cutting themes that we've really seen today. And so first, making sure that more folks can get access to the resources that they need and that they really do help who needs them. Making sure that we have comprehensive career pathways, engaging opportunity youth in those career pathways from a younger age, and making sure that everyone who wants to get on a pathway knows what it is and how to do it. And as Katherine mentioned, investing in that workforce behind the workforce, making sure that we have qualified daycare providers for our children, and making sure that the folks that want to go to work can. And creating new funding models that make it easier for folks that do provide the services to meet the needs of these underrepresented populations. We need to make it so that we have the money out there. We've just got to work together to figure out how best to serve folks. And creating that opportunity for peer-to-peer learning among employers. There are employers that do amazing things and that have been able to do on-the-job training and have been able to have some success. Let's hear from them and let's have them share their stories, and so that we can make sure that we can spread that wealth. And then finally, co-locating those providers and with workforce services. I know we do it, but we can do it better. And the more we can cross-train folks and have people understand how we can all benefit from the services that are out there, the better we're going to do in serving folks. So, Randolph? In thinking about the collective responses to these challenges, sort of as I've went over them, what are some efforts that we could take on that would impact several of these underrepresented groups that we talked today? So what do you think we need from employers or nonprofits or other organizations to get us where we need to be?
Well, thank you, Annie, and so happy to be here with everybody today. So as a nonprofit director in rural Columbus County, and we don't get out much, before big groups like this. I'd like to say hello to all my friends out there who kind of give me a thumbs up too as well. Being on this task force and being a nonprofit director really solidified my thought around the significance and importance of taking more of a rural, urban, or regional approach to systemic problems. And so Brother Philip so eloquently put it around lived experiences. I thought we saw a lot of that in the conversations we had with our task force members. A lot of great ideas, and I think a lot of programs that are doing very well already. I just think sometimes we need the space to be creative and to come together in a collective voice and put it together on paper and then present it to folks and let them do what they need to do with it. We as nonprofit folks and other community-based groups have known forever that we have to organize in the community and get our people to believe first. And I heard the word poverty once, about how poverty drives a lot of things. I do feel that there is some momentum right now on a lot of different issues, particularly in our rural areas, as funders, right, philanthropists, right, are really wanting to invest in success. And so folks like us have been contacted, have been nurtured, have been supported with different funds and capacity building and looking at the communities and strengthening the folks that are doing the work on the ground. Now, the next step in that, I love the word evidence-based. I love the word certified, because that then in turn, I think, puts a stamp on the work, right? So that when you are certified, you walk different, you talk different. So we have to start with the organizations that's doing the work that has to mirror what is going on in those communities. So I grew up on the farm. Y'all gave me the mic, so I'm gonna say it, get my turn. So I grew up on the farm. My parents had minimal formal education. I was one of 12 children. I went to college because they knew they had to invest in me and my siblings. I had a stint in the Air Force, which was pretty cool. And I got a chance to come back to my own community and work and be a change maker. So I am an opportunity youth. I am one of those folks. And when I think about how nervous I am, but it takes me back to rural Columbus County on that tobacco farm as a little boy, when my examples were my parents. And so Buck and Wally, if you're listening there to your boy, I really appreciate everything. But all of us have a similar story to tell. Like there was somebody that helped us along the way. And so Brother Philip, I'm not a preacher, but I do feel like there is something to speak to when a person finds their purpose.
Come on.
So, thank you.
So many of us in workforce development have been trying to address these challenges we've talked about, right? These aren't new. We know they're there. I think what's different today is we understand them deeper. But what feels different now and makes you believe that this change could happen? And I'm opening this to anyone, and multiple folks can respond.
I think the example's here, this audience. It's the day after the Super Bowl, and look at this crowd.
That's right.
I mean, there's some influential people in here. There's, decision makers, policy makers, whatever you want to call. But I think the fact that we have evidence and proof that people are interested in these topics, this right here is enough for me.
Yeah, and I'll say, for me, when I'm gonna try not to get emotional, but there was a time when I was so ashamed of my background, and I didn't know what I was gonna do. When I was on my way here this morning, and I talking to my wife, she was just telling me, "You go out there and you be a voice for the people." And when I was in that room just now, and I was fired up, and I was talking about on-the-job training contracts and educating employers and these second chances, and just to see those professionals, those same people in suits and ties that used to intimidate me, walking up to me like, "I want to learn more. I want to do this where I'm from to help more people." That's the evidence for me. Thank you.
I think that the key word is purpose, right? We all have purpose. North Carolina, we talk about an employment first state, right? So that means that regardless of your abilities, your disabilities, you have a purpose. There is a place for everybody in America's workforce, a place for everybody. Regardless of a disability. This is 2023. We've been talking about these issues for a long time, right? It's hearing each other, walking up alongside each other, crying with each other, right? Feeling it because it hurts. I'm a person with a non-visible disability. I always forget to share that, and I'm always reminded that I need to share that. So I'm sharing it. If you can see this is very large print, and I don't know why I brought it up here because I can't see it, okay? So I was born with underdeveloped optic nerves in both eyes, so I'm legally blind. So I do have lived experience. I know what it's like for an employer or a hiring manager to look at you and with a 4-year degree in foreign language, and I'm interviewing for a pool bar server to just serve food, I didn't get the job. They weren't going to hire me because I shared with them that I had a vision problem, and they were concerned. What? A 4-year degree? Right? Yes, because statistically, college students that have disabilities, that achieve a BA degree, have about a 28% higher rate 1 year out of college, versus those that don't have disabilities, about a 75.5% employment rate 1 year out of college with that same degree. So I get it, right? It doesn't feel good. But we are in a different place now. I think the conversations are happening. We work with employers at Disability in North Carolina all the time. Wells Fargo, for one, who's walked up alongside us and said, "You know what? We need the talent, and communability mentoring is an opportunity for us to invest in college students on HBCU campuses that have disabilities to talk about this intersectionality of disability and race, right? What does that feel like? Our board chair is a person with a disability. He's an executive. He's also a black man, and he knows what it's like to have been raised deaf in one ear and hiding that until he was an executive or a senior manager, because he knew coming out with that was not going to be beneficial. And so it is time. It is time for us to get, and I use this word a lot, but we got to find our grit. We got to find our grit. And I'm just honored to be here on this panel with these experts and these individuals that have walked the walk, and now they're talking the talk. So thank you.
Thank you.
Well said.
I would love to add, so in my work, I've written a lot about mothers in the workforce, issues affecting families, and most of the time, the audience that I'm speaking to is women. Because for most of the time, we, in our society, we think issues affecting mothers at work that's a woman's problem. That's a personal problem. That's something you need to try harder to figure out your childcare. So the fact that I'm invited here to talk about this in the context of economics and the economic impact of our state, I would say that that is a small silver lining of COVID, that it really exposed so much of the burdens families were already carrying. And people with power are now taking notice because it is impacting our economy. People cannot work because they do not have access to safe and affordable childcare. And if you as we heard earlier this morning, we're having all these people move to North Carolina. Those people are bringing all sorts of wonderful things. They're also straining our existing childcare infrastructure, so which is weak. So to me, the fact that we can talk about issues affecting childcare issues affecting maternal employment, and I get to say this in a room that's half men, is actually a huge change in the conversation. So thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, as you guys can tell, there's some great experts here on the stage and within that task force. So we all know that there is some forward momentum going on in our various communities. So with our rural communities, there's things called, our other communities called prosperity zones, which describes using something that may seem negative and give it a positive word to describe it, also like an opportunity youth. So we know that there is forward momentum, and I always like to use things that work, models that already work. So there's some existing models that already work, and when we start talking about how do we get funding into the hands of folks who deserve it the most and have been doing the most work with the least, is ways that we see some philanthropists doing their philanthropy now around figuring out ways to involve the fundee in grant-making decisions. And there's a lot of momentum around that, from anywhere from economic issues, climate issues, social justice issues, on and on. So if you're a nonprofit, work for a nonprofit right now, this is a good time for that. Also, I feel like nonprofits are good at leveraging resources. So we always have to work with less. So we understand what exists in the community, right? So asset mapping is very important, figuring out like what's in your community already and using those things to help you deliver the services, right? So you may be an expert in something, but if you don't have a partner agency that you're working with that know more than you about certain topics, then I feel like you're doing yourself a disservice. And and I think it's important. And I think also that funders are also connecting with our elected officials and having conversations around like how do we fix these large problems that we have, and the funders will say, hey, why don't we include the people who are actually living those experiences? And so that's a great I think low-hanging fruit that we can capitalize on. So I just like to just end my conversation with the possibilities and looking at the models. I have a program called Youth Ambassadors for a Better Community. And these are young people who are youth leaders, and they help drive a lot of our work from getting food to people who need food, which they are included in those numbers, and working with our extension folks to help with training these young people and providing parenting classes. And so for me, coming from where I come from, I think these are much needed things that are already happening. And I just would encourage everybody to look at how they could volunteer for a nonprofit board. You can serve there, be a volunteer or a chaperone on a field trip if you care to do so. But I just think this is a great opportunity, and I'm just thank everybody for allowing little old me to be a part of it.
Thank you. Okay. Anyone else want to chime in? We're good? Okay. Well, I think we get your engagement now. If you want to open the app and tap on this session, which is the Unleashing Our Total Talent, and on the polling button, there you should see the following question. And so we're going to do a poll right now. Let's see. Does your organization intentionally employ underrepresented workers as part of its business model? Give you some time to answer. And apparently it's 10 seconds, I found out. I asked Sarah, like, how long do we wait to find that out? Like, take people up. So far, it looks promising. And I'm glad to see that. Because a diverse workforce is a strong workforce. I mean, if you've all worked in teams, when you have a diverse team, it's the stronger team. And so I'm excited about that number. And thank you all for participating in the poll. Well, thank you again, all of you here, for sharing your perspectives today. And so far, we've heard about the challenges that are faced by those 5 groups. And we've shared some promising ideas that we may have to address them. But we know, too, that there is significant overlap among the underrepresented workers. And we need to consider that when we carve that path forward. So next, we're going to hear about 3 programs that are addressing the needs of 3 cross-cutting groups and making a real difference in supporting the needs of employers and helping to remove barriers for workers. Now, we recognize that these 3 programs are not the only ones that are successfully connecting underrepresented groups to jobs across the state. And we want to hear from you about programs in your area that are getting this done. So, on your table are index cards, and we're asking you to tell us about them. Just a program name and a short description is just fine. So as you listen to our 3 spotlight sessions and a program comes to mind, grab a card, fill it out, and please leave it at the center of your table. The IEI staff will collect these, compile them, and then send a list out to all attendees after the forum ends. So it shows that we're all in this together today, and we're looking for information from you as well to make today successful. The first of our spotlights will focus on connecting older adult workers to jobs, and they'll be joining us momentarily. Thank you again, and thank you all. Thank you.